right, well, our next speaker is going to be Paul Goeringer. Me and Paul actually did our master's together when we were at the University of Arkansas. Paul has some other degrees as well. Oklahoma State's got his Bachelor of Science in Ag Econ. Then he got his JD from the University of Oklahoma. And then his LLM in Agricultural Law from the University of Arkansas. He is currently the Extension Legal Specialist at the University of Maryland. And he has been doing a fair amount of work in hemp. So with that, I'll turn it over to Paul.
Cool. Nope.
May take about 5 clicks.
It may take about 5 clicks. Okay. Well, eventually this will move forward to the next slide. So thank you guys for coming out today for this. And so Aaron had asked me to talk about some of the legal issues that kind of I deal with, and that I see questions coming in from either county extension in Maryland or other states, because I've sort of become the person that works on this with Tennessee, Kentucky, and a few other states looking at this. So some of these issues, and I'm not going to talk about intellectual property. I got an Ag Econ undergrad. I can never be an intellectual property attorney. They want people that get hard sciences because they like to keep other people out. So I don't know a lot about intellectual property issues. If anybody does, feel free to answer some of the questions that may come up if anybody has any on this. But I don't deal a lot with intellectual property. We had a session recently with the American Ag Law Association. We met about a month ago. We had at least 3 sessions on hemp, and at least 2 were focused in on IP issues and how some of those are going to be settled. Some of the other ones are contracting issues. How many people have seen hemp contracts and had to deal with some of those? They're all over the board. There's really no standard contract, and trying to figure out some of the ways processors and other groups are trying to minimize their risk but pass it off to growers has been kind of an issue to look at. How many people get phone calls from people not understanding that hemp is legal to grow next door to them and that there is a smell now associated with that? That's like my second most number of calls here recently. It's just dealing with people, because I am in a more urban state that potentially has a lot of people that do not understand a lot of things about ag. But now we have hemp in there, and they're concerned about marijuana being grown next door to them, or they're concerned about the thing that smells like marijuana being grown next door to them. So that's an issue as well. And then we have the regulatory issues, and that's already kind of been hit upon. I'll talk about some, but we'll talk about a few more here in a minute. Some of the other things are, there are contracts out there, but there really are no good contracts that take care of both growers and processors. How many people have the golden rule up there of contracting? If you wrote it, you took care of yourself. Do you take care of the other party in that contract? Probably not. So there's really no ability currently for growers to sort of protect themselves. That may change as we go along. As we look at some of the regulatory issues out there, what's FDA going to do about CBD? If that's where the money is in the crop, what's FDA going to do about it? We'll talk about some of the things FDA's done here lately. Is everybody in here with extension, except for the few USDA people? Is anybody from Farm Credit? Can you loan money on this yet? It's getting.
We still have a lot of,
Yeah. It's kind of what I thought. And the interim rule that's kind of been hit upon already, I'll hit upon it briefly. Let's talk about regulatory issues. So this month, some of the hurdles went away with hemp, with federal banking regs. They can slightly loan money more readily. You don't have to do the anti-money laundering forms anymore, do you? Or report them as potentially being a suspicious business. And USDA is going to get in the business of loaning to this as well. So that's been changed. So these changes may allow more lending services in here, which could be helpful to the industry. CBD as a food supplement, drug additive. Last year they approved the first drug that's ever been approved for this. I do not want to have to say the name of that drug, so if everyone wants to take a look at it and tell me what that says, I'm from Oklahoma, I can barely pronounce big words. But it was designed to help prevent seizures in people with epilepsy and certain kid groups out there. right about Thanksgiving time this year, they sent out 15 warning letters, Food and Drug Administration, saying that any additive into food products with CBD, it's not generally recognized as safe. You cannot do it. Please stop. This is not new. They've done this before. They've done this about every year since hemp has been legal to grow in the US. They keep sending these letters out. Over the summer, they did specify that they are going to do something, and their timetable is about 3 years to do it. So we don't know at this point kind of what FDA is going to do. So what does this mean? You can't make any health claims. You can't make any claims about what CBD does in products currently when you sell them until FDA gets it approved. FDA is going to take about 3 years to approve this. So we're all waiting in limbo for this. So what does this mean? It means anything sold in interstate commerce between states, FDA regulates. If it's in-state, I do not know what Tennessee is doing in-state through their either health departments or whoever regulates food in the state. That's beyond the scope of what I know, but at least from FDA standpoint, you cannot sell it. What happens if we can't sell it with these health claims associated with it? Does anybody want to buy it at that point? Probably not. So my outlook on this is we don't really know what FDA is going to do at this time. Is anybody really good at fortune telling? If you are, why are you in this room? Why aren't you making money setting up a 1-800 number or 900 or whatever it is now? Until this is kind of clarified up, we don't know what the full market potential is going to be, because why would anybody want to get involved in this if FDA could come in and regulate it at any moment and take it out? What happens tomorrow if FDA comes out and says CBD is a drug, you can't grow it without this license? And we're going to cut down on the number of licenses to keep the market from being flooded. What does that do to hemp in Tennessee? Does it make y'all's lives easier? Does it take away a lot of questions? Makes my life a lot easier too, because how many people want to grow this for fiber? Nobody really wants to grow it for fiber because the market doesn't have the potential as CBD does. So the FDA is kind of the 800-pound gorilla in the room that none of us know what currently they're going to do. I have a student who in the spring is supposed to be looking at all the ways FDA could regulate this and come up with a list of possibilities as to what could happen. Because it's a question I have is how could FDA regulate this besides the food additive and the drug part? Are there other ways they could do it? And what are some things that could happen if they start regulating it? So we already talked about this. If you haven't put in your public comments, please get them in before December 30th. If you need a good read over the holidays while you're hanging out with your family, you can go to regulations.gov, look this reg up, and look at all the wonderful comments that the public has made on this. The public does not always make good comments, and they're very weird at times. So you might have some good comments that you can share with your family and friends. We've kind of already hit upon these. It's got to be done 15 days prior to harvest, total THC, and it's got to be in a DEA registered lab, is what I understand. The other thing that's already been hit upon is we can now transport this stuff freely between states. We'll wait to see what Idaho does. So if anybody wants to take a shipment through Idaho, please do that so we can see what happens. For those that don't remember, last year about this time, Idaho was stopped, what, at least one truckload going through the state to Colorado, and it's still being held. And the USDA's issued guidance at least twice saying this stuff is legal to transport across states. It's illegal to grow hemp in Idaho, so Idaho's view is it's marijuana the second it crossed into the state lines. So yeah, let's see how Idaho handles this once it becomes a deal. So we have the clarification, at least in some areas with USDA. We don't actually know if that's going to be the final rule, what view that final rule takes with USDA. Banking's getting a little cleaner. I'm a member of the American Ag Law Association. We're doing a hemp issue. We actually had somebody in another state with farm credit reach out to us. They were going to provide us a legal article on the banking issues associated with hemp. We can't publish that article because no one at Farm Credit would approve it at the time. Maybe with the rules changes, we could get it approved now, but it was just such a controversial issue. 2 weeks ago, we couldn't get anything approved. And the biggest area where there's a lot of uncertainty is FDA. We don't know what FDA is going to do at this time. If FDA calls CBD a drug, it takes away a lot of the market. It takes away a lot of the problems. it's going to change the system at that point. So we may be dealing with a whole lot of other regulatory issues as to how do you grow this stuff. Yes, sir.
Fully aware of all the CPR, the FDA rules, so like, that would be, could they classify it as a drug or a food additive, or like, help me explain what are the other options?
It's mainly food additive and drugs at this point. Is what I'm aware of. Yeah, and we just don't know what they're going to do with it. My assumption is it's just going to be a food additive, but because they've done that one drug, they could call it a drug and have to regulate it more. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. So the question was basically what beyond food additive and drug could FDA do to regulate CBD or hemp? And I think the biggest question with USDA's regs out there is what states are going to write their own plans and what states are going to adopt to go under the USDA plan that USDA has to write. Because if you look at that, there's basically two options. States can write their own plans, and states can then go, well, we don't want to write our own plan. USDA, why don't you write a plan and you do all the hard work in our state? So I know where I'm at, a bunch of the little states are looking at, we're going to go the USDA route because there's not enough resources in the state to take care of hemp. Because you're going to have how many people to test all the hemp in the state to do 100%? It's going to take a lot of resources to do this in a lot of states. This may not just be all small states. Just big states may look at this too. It's just kind of out there as to what's going to happen with this deal. And my view is, why wouldn't we want to put this all on USDA to make you guys spend all your money? Well, you're not with AMS. Make AMS spend all their money to have to enforce this rule. Any questions on regulatory issues? Let's talk about legal issues. One of the biggest legal issues is contracting. You've all seen at least one of these contracts, right? How clear are they on a lot of things? Are there a lot of ways for the processor to get out of buying the hemp whenever possible? That's almost always one of the problems with these contracts is everything when you look at it is ways for the processor to get out of these. So we'll talk a little bit about contracts. Not a lot is what makes a contract, because I think everybody in the room probably knows what makes a contract. You've all signed a contract in your life, right? If you haven't, we can talk afterwards, but for the most part, most people have. What do growers need to consider in this? You're getting these questions. What do people need to think about when they're doing this? You don't have to answer me, but kind of what do you think people need to be thinking about when you're doing this? The other issue is, and this may be just a Maryland issue and it may be a West issue too, but we end up with a lot of people claiming this is nuisance and then having to point them to the right to farm law to show them how this applies. And this is becoming the issue I did not know was going to be a part of my life a year ago when the state took up the idea of starting the research program in this, is that I was going to deal with all these people just concerned about hemp being grown next door to them. So we already kind of talked about this. What are the risk management tools that existed this growing season for hemp? Were there anything? Contract was about it, right? There's no crop insurance this growing season. Moving into next growing season, we'll have whole farm for it. And if anyone gets a successful whole farm claimed on hemp, I would like to know how they did that, because I still don't think whole farm is going to pay on it. I think it's going to be really hard to get whole farm to pay on it. So this contract's an important tool to help manage the risk, because this is really the only tool we have. So if this is the only way we can manage risk at this time until we get enough numbers to sort of start developing crop insurance, we really are like Homer. We're just uninsured, running around, really happy about that, apparently. But we have to think about this. So I've looked at a few, you guys have looked at some. They're not consistent in any terminology. They're not consistent among a lot of stuff. There's a lot of common language in them. There's a lot of provisions in there that say if there's a dispute and one party wins, somebody will pay attorney's fees. There's a lot of provisions on warranties, a lot of provisions that we would expect to find on these stating which state law will apply. So there's a lot of areas where these contracts are standard, but when it comes down to a lot of the production stuff, a lot of the clauses that we would expect outside of standard contract terms, they're not the same, and then a lot of them are not clear at all. So if you're working with a grower, what should they be looking for in a good contract? Any thoughts? Speaking right after lunch, it's almost like speaking to a group of producers right after lunch. Should they at least have language in there that's not allowing the processor to get out whenever possible from this? We're going to talk about some clauses people should at least consider and how they should be developed, because this is kind of the problem. So what do we need to look for in a good contract? There is one set of IP issues here. It seems like they almost always need to state that the genetics are owned by somebody, because typically the processor may own this genetics and may be licensing it from somebody, and they need to limit some uses for future seeds. So that's probably something that needs to be in a lot of these, just based on how the industry has developed. I mean, almost all of these are failed marijuana strains in some way, from what I'm understanding. So we got to protect the genetics in some way to do this and limit their ability to use seeds. And we may want to specify that any seed, anything, just remains their property, so they have the right to come back and get it. I mean, if we're dealing with the bank, we want to, if we're the processor, we probably want to limit the bank's ability to take a lien out on as much of this as possible. That may not be possible in the end, but we want to limit some of this ability to come back and get the seeds and reuse those seeds. I put all this under quality. I couldn't think of anything else to kind of list a bunch of these terms under. So what if we start dealing with this? One of the big areas from talking to growers is, if they can't get down, what about this percentage moisture? That we have to have it down to a certain dry condition. What should that be at? Any thoughts? 10%. Can you get 10% or less in your area? Is it possible? Yeah. Well, I'm just saying, like, when we're thinking about this, we have to think about what's possible to get for dry weight in some way. What's the percentage we can get this down to? Because if it's not humanly possible in our area, we probably can't do that. Should it be bucked when it's delivered? A word I did not know till about 6 months ago. How should it be delivered? The other thing too, it's all going to depend on processors, isn't it? So maybe we need to specify some of this so we know how this needs to be delivered in the end, because a lot of the contracts I saw were very unclear in how this stuff should be delivered. It just said it should be delivered, the materials should be delivered. It never specified what material meant. And why might you want to start numbering or reducing this down to very clear terms? Am I giving the processor less ability to cancel the contract in the end? And part of this is just trying to get that ability gone from the processor. They may not be able to take all the hemp they've contracted for, but that's their problem in the end. Your job is just to be able to deliver it. But the grower's job is, a lot of them didn't even specify, you know, should it be free of trash and debris? Which seemed weird to me, because I would think you would want to make sure that there's no trash, there's no debris, and all you're doing is delivering hemp. Should it at least specify a percentage of CBD? If we can get to that level, maybe. Again, a lot of this is just, can we get it down to a level to where we're taking away some of the unknown risks that are associated with this? And then we know at least what we have to do when we deliver it. This may not be something we need to worry about. Should it be delivered free of unapproved pesticides that do not show up on a test? One of the regulatory issues I didn't bring up is how many pesticides are approved for usage on hemp currently? 0. There are 4, I believe, currently going up for to be reviewed to see if they can be used on hemp. So if it's showing up with pesticides, we have other problems, and that's going to be a different issue that probably the State Department of Ag is going to have to get involved in to look at unapproved usage of pesticides on a crop. And going back to the trash and other issues, should it be delivered disease and insect free? Again, terms that were not in the previous contracts that I reviewed, but the goal is with quality, we really do want to get it specified what the quality is. When I started looking at this and talking with people, one of the biggest issues that I was told that was going to be with hemp contracting is, well, no one knows what quality means in this crop at this point. We may not know what quality means, but if I go back, well, no, it's too far back. Most of us should assume that when we deliver corn, we wouldn't deliver it with trash and other debris, right? Yeah. I mean, I grew up on a wheat farm. I knew automatically when we delivered wheat to the elevator, we didn't want trash and other stuff in the wheat. So I'm assuming with hemp, we don't want that. We may or may not need to know the percentage of CBD. We probably don't want it showing up with unapproved pesticides as of right now. And the other thing is we may want to make sure it's disease and insect free, just trying to get to a basic quality level so we know what the quality is of this product going in. Then once we have figure out what, you know, the grading system for this will be, maybe we can build that in, but are we anywhere near being able to put a grading system on hemp? I wouldn't think right now we are, but. So we need to make sure it's the moisture levels attainable in the area. You say 10%. If I tried to do that on the Eastern Shore of Maryland, there's no way with humidity I could get it down to 10% is my guess. Even drying it out, I think there would be problems just with the air moisture, but there may be ways to get it done that I don't know yet. Yeah. 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 And then maybe I put in a facility to dry it that I don't have right now. Yeah. So some of this is we have to start thinking as a grower and the processor too. Specifically, the other thing is we just want to have a quality in there so we have some of these rejection issues addressed. Because the first thing, when I started talking to farmers about this in other states where they said, any way you can get rid of quality issues to stop rejections, that's like the first thing we look for. But what's the problem with most farmers in all of this? How big are most farmers to most of these processors? Does anybody have negotiating ability in any of this? When I first started looking at this, somebody in Kentucky told me to think of it as a poultry contract. And the more I think about it, it really is a poultry contract because you have the same level of the ability to negotiate this contract as compared to another contract. You have very little deal ability. The other thing that was never entirely clear is how much you were going to get paid as a part of this contract. This was the weirdest thing to me because I assumed you would want to know how much you were going to get paid, right? You're signing a production contract, you're going to deliver it. You at least want to know how they're going to pay you, right? It was never entirely clear in some of these contracts how you were going to be paid. Now, mind you, I need to point out, I only got to review 5 contracts, and it took me a while to get 5 contracts just to review. These are not the easiest contracts to get your hands on. And not all of them have provisions to keep information quiet. Part of it was just trying to find people that were willing to share it and share what their experience had been part of the issue. So we have this here where you're paid $250 upon the execution of the agreement per acre and $250 at the end. That's pretty simple, right? I know how much I'm going to make. I just figure out the acres and do that. That's pretty simple. Other examples that were out there, potentially we could look at where the market price was coming from. We just have, is there a set Board of Trade number for this yet? We trading futures contracts on this yet? So we got to figure out how much we trust that market that they're pulling the price from as the legitimate market price. But in the end, we have to be able to at least come up with some way to verify what people are going to be paid. I think that's all I have. The other thing is, when do they have to pay? They were very light on this information. Why, if you're the processor, do you want it to be very light on this information? Then we don't know when we have to pay, and then we're never in breach of contract if we don't pay timely. So this one's very clear, 25% of the payment over these specified times. That's very clear. Others were not that clear. Others were very loosey-goosey on when that was going to happen. The other thing they weren't very clear on, what happens if no payments made? We do have breach, but how do we go about getting our money? If these processors don't have cash on hand, how are we going to get our money? So there has to be some way, and that's something where I'm starting to think about, how do we do this? Go to the livestock barn, buy livestock, that money's held kind of in escrow. Is there a way to set up at least to where we're getting 50%, 75% of what the max of the value of the contract is, to where we could at least put it in escrow in some way and then hold it till we could get the money? If most of these people are cash poor, that may be hard to do, but that's something I'm sitting there thinking about, how can we make sure that this money's held in a way to where we get it in some way, where it's held in trust or some way to verify payment? Because this is like one of the bigger problems, is just making sure people are going to get paid on a timely basis. Any questions so far? What if they don't want to take it and you got to store it on the farm for a few months? Can you maintain quality? What do you got to do to maintain quality at that point? Put it in your bedroom? Put it in the living room? You know, how are we going to store this? How do we maintain sort of the quality to make sure, is there extraction, other type of services that exist that may be able to pull it out at a level and then we hold it that way? That may not be possible. There may not be enough processing capability to do all that in some way. How are we going to hold this in some sort of quality assurance way to make sure that we're going to meet the terms of the contract? Because I can see why processors would want to do this, because who's it easier to push off storage on? The farmer, because then they can pay for it. Or is this an area where we also need additional services to spring up, where we have storage capability to where we can go with like a co-op or something else where they just develop storage facilities to help maintain this stuff? Is there any market? Yes, sir. Uh-oh.
How do we respond when it appears most contracts are dropped by the processor?
Repeat the question.
Oh.
How do we respond when it appears most contracts are dropped by the processor?
How do we respond when most contracts appear to be dropped by the processor? Yeah, I'm still trying to figure that one out, but it's pretty much at that point they need to get attorneys involved, and that's been a big problem. Because there's really no recourse at that point.
That was a reality for a number of growers.
I've seen the letter to where a lot of them were told they would be assisted to help find new markets here, and it seems like at that point that's a processor problem, and there's some recourse against the processor, but how much it's going to be is probably not much.
They've said they've invested all their money in the crop, no money from it.
That's never a good thing. But there's a lot of people that do that, to where there's choices. Wasn't a good risk management strategy. But no, there's recourse, but it does require going to court and trying to force them to at least. Yeah. And that was going to be one of the points I bring up on that, is there's a lot of this where growers need to start teaming up together to either create cooperatives or groups to where they're negotiating together, and they'll get more bargaining power out of this. Because, you know, if you go to negotiate with, you know, whoever, big group, let's say you go to Walmart to negotiate, how much power do you have when you walk into Walmart to negotiate? If everybody in the town walks in together and has one person being the voice and you negotiate, you have a little bit more power, don't you? So maybe there's some ability for people to team up to do some of this. And this is some of the stuff worked with people when they're leasing for renewable energy resources, is looking at how do you team up together to sort of negotiate a better lease. And a lot of that could work here as well.
Before you leave that, do you think a lot of these companies have any money to cough up with themselves?
I don't.
Or are they going to continue to throw good money after that by hiring an attorney to go after money that's not even there?
I don't know about here, but I think a lot of these places, companies don't have a lot of money just because up until 2 weeks ago, some of the lending. So, oh yeah, sorry, I keep forgetting I have to repeat the question for people online. So is it worth, I guess the basic question was, is it worth throwing good money after bad? How much money do these processors actually have? I think in a lot of cases, these processors don't have a lot of money. They were getting money from other sources that may not always had a lot of cash, or they had a lot of cash on hand because they couldn't put it in banks and they needed a spot to put money in. CBD processing seemed like a good venture, and as long as these processors are getting that money in regularly, they might have enough money, but on the whole, I don't think they have enough money to do anything to go after them. So that's part of the issue. I do think the banking regulation changes will help that to where there'll actually be capital coming in. Yes, Aaron.
Is there a legal way to protect yourself if you have a processor that says, I can't pay you right now, but I want you to deliver as I process some of the stuff I've got? Is there a legal way or a process that you can implement that would protect you against that?
So there's a legal way to protect yourself if you're delaying delivery if the processor requests it. At that point, the best way is probably going to be to do another contract, because there's really no state laws at this point that would protect people in those cases. With other commodities, we may have had that, but not with hemp. We really haven't thought through all the legal issues as to what needed to be developed to actually start doing this, and not just Tennessee, in every state needed to do this.
One follow-up on that. Is there any states that you know of that have an exemption fund for growers?
Not yet. I don't know of anybody that has one. The only one I could think of that might be is Kentucky, and I don't think they actually have that. So yeah, let's talk about nuisance. I've already mentioned this. We've seen this rising number of neighbors complaining about hemp production and hemp processing, that it creates this smell, it creates this odor, and it's impacting their properties and their property values. I often want to point out to these people they should move next door to a hog farm or something else, and they would have a lot worse smell. So the one thing I always point out and have to keep reminding people in Maryland about, mainly not farmers, but mainly rural residents who have no ag background, that there are right to farm laws in all 50 states. They create this presumption that ag is not a nuisance and provide a defense. I have Tennessee's up there. It creates a rebuttable presumption that the farm or farming operation is not a nuisance. And I put the citation up there if you actually want to look it up. What does that mean to not fall under that rebuttable presumption? All you have to do is use generally accepted ag practices for everyone in here that works for Extension. You tell them what these generally accepted ag practices are every day. They need to be doing that, and then they need to comply with whatever rules and statutes apply out there. Tennessee is the only state that has done this so far. You actually list hemp under your right to farm law, along with a lot of other stuff, especially how it's supposed to be grown. So thank you for being the leader in that. You made my life easier. I've used you as an example in a number of states as to what they could do to make right to farm laws better for hemp. Other states, not so entirely clear, as I just said. So as we're looking at the legal issues, as we're looking at some of the regulatory issues, regulatory certainty may help cure some of these issues with contracts. We may be able to get more people to invest in CBD if we actually knew CBD was going to be legal as a food additive or as some health alternative through FDA. Because we think about, why would you want to invest money in CBD if you don't know what's going to be legal tomorrow? How are you going to get your investment back? So this legal uncertainty that exists with FDA has sort of helped create some of the well, it's not one of the major reasons, but it's one of the reasons why we have so many issues, especially associated with contracting. There are a lot of bad contracts out there with this industry. I reviewed 5. If I probably got 100 of them, I probably would have had half of them would have been bad, and I don't know where the good category would have been, but it would have been very low. And growers need a lot better mechanisms out there to negotiate. Is that some sort of, how do they come together? Is it through a co-op? Is it through some sort of trade association? Is it through something to give them better negotiating power? They need to do something to help them negotiate better, because right now, one person negotiating against the company is not going to work that well. Yes, Aaron?
Question on this kind of goes back to contracting. The whole farm revenue protection crop insurance policy is coming out. There's a requirement in there to have a signed contract. Will the USDA be issuing any templates that will end up providing additional guidance besides price?
I haven't heard anything, but I can ask, because I'm curious about that now.
The other one that I would kind of piggyback on that is the National Ag Law Center or any of those other ones have a template that,
Nobody has one. That's what part of our project is to develop too. But we haven't even got that funded yet. It's trying to develop a template for people to use, because there's a lot of bad contracts out there. And the other thing out there, especially with legal, just because of all the issues that I end up dealing with, more states need to be like Tennessee and clarify. Because if I look at Maryland, I have no idea if hemp falls under the law. Ag and farm products is defined broadly enough. I think it is, but until a court tells me that, I have no idea, and I can't tell a grower that. I mean, we also have a provision in there that says you have to be a farm for 1 year, and there's been a lot of people that said, well, they haven't grown hemp for a year. And I'm like, no, how long's the farm been there? So we have to go back and look at how long the farm's been there. So there's a lot of issues as to where states could do better at just clarifying that hemp falls under it, because we have a lot of issues where people just don't understand. And at some point in the new year, I'm going to do a lot more on contracting on my blog at agris.umd.edu. You can sign up. And at some point, I'll read the post to you at this podcast. I think that's all I have. So